Every red-blooded hunter that's read the stories of Robert Rourke and Ernest Hemingway and Peter Hathaway Capstick and, well, our president, Theodore Roosevelt, longs to hunt the Dark Continent. And of all the animals there that call to us as hunters the most these days, because of a combination of practical affordability and accessibility, is probably the one known as Black Death, the Cape buffalo. It's proper dangerous game. It's one of the original Big Five dangerous game animals, and yet it's nowhere near as controversial, shall we say, as an elephant or a rhino or a lion, or even in many cases, a leopard, which are the other four of the original dangerous Big Five. And so Cape buffalo, being plentiful and being non-controversial, they enjoy kind of a special status these days as being the epitome of the exotic, international dangerous game hunt that the average guy can aspire to go hunt. And that, my friends, is what this episode today is kind of about. Not just necessarily Cape buffalo, the hows, the whys, the wheres, and whatnot, but it's a string of stories about the Cape buffalo hunts I've been on. Now, 3 of those were my own. The rest were friends that I was privileged enough to accompany on their own hunts. And we had some really cool adventures, including one full-on, bona fide, genuine charge from a bull that wanted to kill all of us. And my friend Doug Turnbull, the legendary Colt and Winchester restorations expert, and his PH, Jock Strauss, got that bull stopped at exactly 4 paces. When he slid to a stop, the dust that his snowplow maneuver kicked up washed over us standing there. And I'm going to tell that story here too. This, my friends, is just a little group of stories, true stories, from the Dark Continent about hunting Black Death. And to try and make this a little bit special for those of you that like to see photographs, and if I do say so, some good photographs, I'm creating this episode as a voiceover for a slideshow. There will be anything from 2 to half a dozen or more photographs of these buffalo, along with, in several cases, the firearms that were used, and in a few cases, the bullets that were used on these buffalo. And that will be available to our loyal patrons on patreon.com/backcountry. It'll publish there about the same time or shortly after this episode drops on the podcast listening apps, right? So if you want to see the full presentation, would love to have you join us there on patreon.com/backcountry. Become a member of our little backcountry hunting tribe and see these really cool photographs of my friends and I's Cape buffalo hunted in Africa. All right, let's dive right in with the first one, which is also the first buffalo that I had the privilege of seeing hunted. This is my friend Thomas Provsgaard, and he tells his own story on one of the early episodes of the podcast that aired back in, what was it? Early summer, late spring time of 2019. We hunted in June and July of 2019 in Namibia with my good friend Jock Strauss of Kovas Hunting Safaris. A wonderful, wonderful outfit that I just can't recommend enough. We were in what used to be known as the Caprivi Strip, the panhandle of Namibia that stretches across the top of Botswana and takes in the Okavango River Delta, or part of it, and it's truly wild Africa up there. We were a long, long way from any high fence operation. And by the way, just as a side note, folks, all of these buffalo on this, that we'll tell the stories of on this episode, were hunted 100% free range. Pretty cool and quite a unique characteristic these days of hunting Cape buffalo. A lot of places you can still do free range, but I would say probably the bulk of the buffalo shot in South Africa are shot in enclosures. Big ones, to be fair, and they're wild animals. They're dangerous, no doubt about it. So they're, it's still a legitimate hunt, but there's just something a little bit extra, a little bit special about hunting them free range. Okay, so Thomas had always wanted to go to Africa. He was my neighbor at the time, and we decided we were going to do a safari. Others on this trip were some friends of mine that I'd made clear back when I was working out of the Peterson Publishing building in Los Angeles as a young associate editor there. Their names were Nathan Roberts and Robert Aird, both of whom continue to be friends of mine to this day. And we went over planning to try and hunt Cape buffalo and plains game, and Thomas had been offered a special opportunity to hunt a management buffalo for the local tribe at a much reduced price. And he'd said, yeah, let's do that. Now, here's the cool thing about this. Doug Turnbull, the restorations firearms expert, was going to come with us. And he wanted to hunt plains game, management game, and if opportunity presented, also management Cape buffalo. He'd shot a couple of Cape buffalo before, but he never got the full deep buffalo hunting experience that he craved. So we took some really cool firearms along on the trip. That's what I'm getting at here, my friends. Turnbull took 2 of my rifles and worked them over for this hunt. One was a Kimber Caprivi 8400, chambered in .416 Remington Magnum, and he took that rifle apart, color case hardened the action and the tally rings and bases that go on top of it, stripped the stock of its finish, slenderized it a bit because it was a bit bulky and awkward in some areas, refinished it with a French red finish, put the whole thing back together with a charcoal bluing on the metal parts that weren't color case hardened and sent it back to me. It's fantastically beautiful. The other one was one of the new made Winchester 1886s that you can currently buy. And he took that rifle and threw away everything but the action. Took the barrel off, which is a 4570 barrel. Took the stocks off, which were rather plain walnut. And he put some nice walnut on there. It's not spectacular. It's still working man grade, but man, it's got a lot more color and contrast and figure in it than the old stocks do. He put a nice thick rubber recoil pad on it, which I was going to need, because he then also put on a 26-inch octagon barrel and chambered my rifle into .475 Turnbull. That is a big, powerful lever action cartridge. It shoots 400 to 500 grain bullets very comfortably and is the same diameter as the legendary .470 Nitro Express. Generates a couple hundred feet per second less velocity than the Nitro Express, but still carries a lot of authority. So those were the 2 big bore rifles we'd be hunting with. I also, for plains game, took a Kimber, a Mountain Ascent in 280 Ackley improved, and Thomas had a Christensen Arms rifle in 28 Nosler. We all had various other rifles, but those 2 would be the dangerous game rifles for all of us except for Doug Turnbull. He brought an original Winchester 1886 that had been through the ringer, and he found it and restored it with new wood and a new barrel and some engraving, and it's a presentation grade rifle with his initials kind of embossed in gold on the side, almost like the Quigley Down Under rifle had, if you are familiar with that film. Interestingly, that rifle was a second-year production action, so it was made in 1887, if memory serves, and he's hunted all over the world with that rifle. I think it's had 3 different barrels on it that he's shot out doing testing and so forth. Anyway, super cool history with that. So here we were in Namibia, up in the wild country, and Thomas was the only one initially that had a tag. Well, the local tribe's king got a hold of our outfitter and said, we're actually going to throw our big early summer festival the week you guys are here, and we'd like 3 more buffalo and a hippo. And wow, it was on at that point. These buffalo were all affordable enough that we could buy in. We got all 3 additional buffaloes. So we had 4 with Thomas's. And then I shot the hippo as well. And we had, 5 days to get all of them. Plus we were hunting plains game along the way. Thomas shot a tremendous kudu bull partway through and so forth. So at any rate, we got started, I think it was the first day there with Thomas's buffalo. We found a group of, I think it was 3 old Dagaboy bulls in a pan, kind of a empty water gathering area rimmed with thorn brush. And we played cat and mouse with them for a little while, and they kind of got onto us, but then relaxed and bedded, and we were able to close to about 80 yards. At this point, Thomas got on the sticks, 3-legged shooting sticks, standing just as one of these old bulls stood and faced us straight on. Now, we were not looking for trophy bulls. We were looking for old bulls past their prime breeding age and with kind of poor genetics in their horns. We didn't want to shoot great big trophy bulls that this outfitter could then go on, and hunt with other clients that were paying legitimate money for this opportunity. But this was still a pretty good looking bull, all of us thought. Not a monster, but he was old and gnarly and had pretty impressive horns on him. Well, he stood facing us, quartering ever so slightly. And so Thomas put his bullet just to the side of that bull's breastbone. And he was shooting the Kimber in .416 Remington Magnum. It was loaded with 400 grain trophy bonded bear claw bullets, factory ammunition loaded by Federal. The bull rocked hard, almost collapsed right there with the impact of this bullet, and then wheeled and took off following the other 2 bulls. And Thomas, true to the practice he'd been doing with me, he was almost my next door neighbor. We did a lot of shooting together preparing for this hunt. He ran the bolt like a champion and shot a solid, non-expanding bullet. So it was the trophy-bonded sledgehammer bullet, up raking through that bull's hip, broke his pelvis up through his abdomen and into his vitals from behind as that bull took off. And we listened. We were hoping to hear a buffalo's death bellow, but we didn't. And we listened, and we listened, and about 10 minutes later, we went in. 3 of us had rifles, chambers loaded, safety, thumbs on safeties, as we walked in, and the trackers followed this bull. We went maybe 100 yards, and there was good blood, when suddenly bulls erupted from the brush next to us. Thankfully, they headed out away from us. We'd spooked them. I'll tell you what, that got all the already high adrenaline just spiked through the roof. So carefully, we continued. And another 15 or 20 yards further, I looked up ahead, and underneath the low-hanging branches of a thorn tree, I could see a buffalo laying. And I got the PH's attention, pointed it out to him, and he looked for a minute, gave us a thumbs up, and then we closed in as quietly as we could. We still weren't sure it was dead, right? He chucked a couple of branches at it, didn't move, and sure enough, the bull was stone dead right there, killed very cleanly, I'm sure, with Thomas's first shot. The second shot, just a really good effort at following up, breaking him down so he couldn't go too far, adding a blood trail in case we needed another hole to bleed in this buffalo, right? Which, by the way, folks, Craig Boddington wrote in his book on buffalo and told me in person at one point as well that he's never seen a buffalo that's been shot 2 or more times escape. Sometimes you have to track him a ways, but he's never seen him totally lost, whereas he's seen quite a few buffalo that were just shot with 1 bullet that actually end up getting away because they can't be tracked effectively enough, or 2 or 3 days in, the track just gets lost. 2 holes, 2 bullets, and a Cape buffalo. If you can do that, always do it. We celebrated. We took some good pictures, and went back. And if I'm not mistaken, that night we had the equivalent of Cape Buffalo Rocky Mountain oysters. The chef there, they have a really good camp cook, had sliced the buffalo's balls, and they were for all the world like onion rings because they had apparently a pithy center. He pulled out, threw away, breaded them, and then fried them, and they were fantastic. Once you got over the fact that you're eating Cape Buffalo balls, they were amazing. And funny enough, in my case at least, I've always had a thing for, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit of a throwback to the way some of the Native Americans used to like to eat a portion of a kill that represented that animal's character or its spirit or whatever. So it's heart. In this case, we're eating the Cape Buffalo's balls. I can't think of anything more applicable to this incredibly courageous, gnarly, tough animal. And besides, they tasted good. So great start to a buffalo hunt. Next day we went out and it was Doug Turnbull's turn. And because we weren't searching through a bunch of trophies or a bunch of bulls looking for the ultimate trophy, it wasn't too hard to find at the time just an old bull with, the age and the slightly less than spectacular genetics to go hunt. But still, buffalo are buffalo and they're cagey. And those old bulls are especially cagey. They'd brush up early. It was hot. And so we ended up hunting through a large part of this day before we found a bull that was right. And it happened dramatically. We were actually just trucking out across through the savanna there. I mean, there's trees and whatnot, so it wasn't just open grasslands, but passing a thicket on our left when suddenly the tracker, he was a tall black guy named Peter, put on the brakes, backed up a couple steps, squatted down, and bobbed his head left and right so he could see through the brush, and then he pointed and whispered to Jock, the PH. And Jock looked with his binocular, and then he looked around and motioned Doug Turnbull up, and I could tell it was on. There was clearly a bull in this little thicket that we were going after. Now, we recorded that night while the events that transpired were fresh in our minds around a crackling camel thorn fire in Namibia on site, and that episode published as well with Thomas's story. Just an incredible story. Go back and listen to that if you're interested in Cape Buffalo hunting. We snuck into this little tunnel. It felt like we were crawling down a warthog tunnel into the thorn brush. The PH was front with Doug right behind him, and then a cameraman right behind Doug, and then there was me, and then behind us were a couple of trackers. And we were already close. We went maybe 40 yards in, looked to the right, and then Jock, the PH, took a deep knee. He almost sat down on the sand, indicating that Doug needed to rest his rifle on his shoulder. So Doug knelt behind him and aimed through a gap. I couldn't see the buffalo at this point. There was just kind of a dark, shadowy area in the thicket. I found out later he was 27 yards, this bull was. He was standing broadside, and he was on to us, but not spooked. He was just standing there and looking. Doug squoze the trigger, and that .475 Turnbull rifle rang out, and you could hear the smack of the bullet hitting the bull. Now, Doug had loaded first a 400-grain Barnes triple shock bullet, big hollow-nose bullet that expands really big, and if memory serves, does about 2,200 feet per second out of the cartridge. The bull launched into a death run, heart shot. And that's when I saw him. Doug ran his lever action fast and came up off of Jock's shoulder into a half crouch, swinging his rifle with the bull and fired again. And the bull took that bullet hard and turned partly sideways. Doug ran his lever again, and at that point, either from the shot, the sound of the lever going, or Doug's movement, that bull saw us, and he hooked and came straight for us. At this point, he was maybe 30 yards out, 28 to 30 yards, because he'd been running across in front of us. There was a big clump of just a giant thorn brush in front of us that he had to kind of come around. But before he got to it, Jock shot once, and dust flew from the bull's ribs. He'd shot him with a 470 Nitro Express and a 500 grain Hornady DGX bonded bullet. Doug ran another bullet into the bull as well through his ribs at that point. Then the bull was behind the brush, and for just a second or two, everything went still because he was coming, but they couldn't shoot. Jock was on the second trigger of his double rifle. Doug had ran his lever again, was on his fourth shot, and that bull came around. He cleared the brush at about 6 or 7 paces, coming like a locomotive. And I have never seen the sort of intensity that was in this buffalo bull's eyes. Meanwhile, the cameraman was bailing. He'd come running straight backward up that little trail that we were on. I stepped to the side to let him go past and then hooked forward and to the right. Because if a Cape buffalo takes down a hunter, well, if he hooks him, the hunter's going to go flying and maybe be gored, right, with a hole from one of the horns. If he knocks him down and runs over the top of him, the hunter's potentially gored and probably going to get stepped on, and that injures you too, right? That's a lot of weight coming down. But if a bull takes you down and drives you into the ground with his boss, that big heavy base part of his horns, that's when they kill you, because you've got 1,500 to 2,000 pounds worth of insane, driving, malignant energy coming down, crushing your chest, your skull, whatever they go to pounding with their boss. And in my mind, I could see that bull getting to my 2 friends that were maybe 10 feet in front of me and taking one or both of them down. And I wanted to be to the side, prepared to shoot through that bull's neck and shoulders, depending on what angle I got, to try and kill him before he killed one of them if necessary. Thankfully, I didn't need to. The bull cleared that thorn brush, banking like he was coming around it on a curve because he knew where we were, and he was coming the fast route rather than trying to plow through the brush. He was banking toward us, and as he cleared, 2 rifle shots rang out almost with the same sound. One hit the bull right underneath his boss and drove backward through his brain at an angle and exited under the boss on the back of his head. The other one went through his ear into his neck and broke his spine where it connects back through his shoulders into the main frame, right? And the bull just went nose down, crashed and slid to a stop 4 paces in front of us, dust billowing around us. Oh my word. One of, to this day, the most intense experiences I've ever had, not just hunting, but ever. This was incredible. I yelled louder than I should have. Doug was yelling. This is in relief, right? You're venting pent-up energy and the spike of adrenaline that you've just had and celebrating the fact that you're alive still, folks. It was incredible. Jock, on the other hand, I'll never forget. He looked at me, turned with a little smile, and just as much intensity in his eyes as that Cape buffalo had had, and quietly, he said, "We got him stopped properly." And that was it, out of our intrepid PH. Nerves of steel, folks, which is why you hire a good professional hunter when you go Cape buffalo hunting. Jock's dad, he's retired now, retired professional hunter himself. He was back in camp across the way and way down the river, but close enough that he heard the shots. And you imagine how they went. Bang, 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 bang. And he said he knew at the time things had gone south. And so he was understandably on the edge of his seat till we got back. What an incredible experience. And Doug Turnbull turned to me afterwards, after we'd kind of all settled down. He said, that, not that I wanted to be charged ever. You never asked for that, but that was the Cape buffalo hunting experience of a lifetime that I've always dreamed of having. Tracking these bulls through old Africa and then hunting them up close in the thicket with his vintage lever action and the cartridge he designed, and just absolutely properly getting the job done when things started to go south. Now, when you look for those of you that are going to watch the slideshow, when you look at the pictures here, you'll see Doug's fine rifle laying across this old bull's horns. And in his forehead, there's a bullet hole that's draining a little blood. That one was from the PH. That's the one that brained him. The hole that Doug put, in one of the pictures, you can almost see it where his left ear is kind of bloody. But you can't really see that. That one we traced. And interestingly, that was with a 400 grain Barnes solid bullet. So the first one broadside was an expanding bullet. We recovered that, and I've got a picture of it here that I'm going to show. Beautiful, perfect mushroom. They found that against the hide on the offside after going through both shoulders of a big Cape Buffalo bull. The other one, it's kind of a lighter, almost yellow brass color here rather than the vivid copper color. These are both laying on the boss of the bull that, this isn't the bull he shot, but it's a Cape Buffalo bull skull that was in camp. And it looks almost like you could load it again and shoot it again. You can see the rifling streaks in it, but there's no deformation. It's perfect. This is the bullet that Doug Turnbull shot through the buffalo's ear and back through his spine and his shoulders. And the skinners told us they recovered this bullet back near the buffalo's tail. Wow. That's full-length penetration on a big, heavy Cape Buffalo. Doggone impressive. Okay, next we have an equally cool story, but it was more about beauty and just the scene and the smells and the African golden hour and a gift she gave to all of us hunting, but specifically to Nathan Roberts, my friend that came and hunted with us. And I had loaned him my 86 Winchester in 475 Turnbull to hunt his own Cape Buffalo with. And he'd asked me to come along with the Kimber 416 in case he needed to take a little bit longer shot or in case he needed somebody to help back him up. Obviously, the PH would be there, but we've been friends for a long time, and he just wanted me to be there, and I was honored to be. We found a group of 4 or 5 bulls out in the grasslands with just a few big trees just before sunset set in, and we hustled about 800 yards through grass that was taller than my head. We were moving pretty quickly on buffalo trails to close the distance on these bulls, and I couldn't help thinking, man, a bull could boil out of this grass at a distance of feet, not just yards, if there's a cranky old one in here by himself. But my PH wasn't worried, so I wasn't worried, and on we went through this grass, winding our way down through near the river. When we got close to the bulls, we found a giant termite mound growing up between a pair of camel thorn trees, big tall trees. They might have been something other than camel thorn. Anyway, big trees. And we used that as cover to stalk these buffalo behind. And when we got there, Nathan was able to crawl up and lay prone at about 80 yards with his rifle. Jock told me to be ready. He didn't even take his double rifle from the tracker. I figured they were far enough. He figured, I guess, they were far enough away, and with me to back Nathan up, we're probably good to go. The right bull stood up, and Nathan put a bullet perfectly through his heart, one shot, with iron sights and that 475 Turnbull lever action. Immediately, all 4 bulls rumbled off in that big galloping run, and the others closed in around the one Nathan had shot, so there's no chance for a second shot. They went about 80 or 100 yards and stopped, all bunched up. Again, still no chance for a follow-up. A minute later, the bull that he'd shot went down, stone dead, right there. The evening at that point was almost like it was sunset. It was past sunset. The sun was gone. It was just beautiful. Big rose and orange colored evening sky over on the sunset side. And we walked toward the buffalo. The others with him had gotten pretty belligerent. When they smelled blood from a dead bull, they get pretty aggressive. And so we just stood from about 100 yards, ready but careful, and waited for them as they postured and stared us down until they were satisfied, and then they slowly worked off, and we were able to go and take photographs with Nathan's bull. Just a really cool experience and a spectacular one-shot kill on this bull. That was the only one-shot kill I'd seen on a Cape buffalo until last November. And I'll tell that story here toward the end. If you're looking at the slideshow, you'll see this bull. His horns are caked in mud. That beautiful sky is behind him. And on his shoulder, in exactly the right place, you can see the bullet hole where Nathan drove that 500-grain trophy-bonded bear claw bullet through his heart. And the last photo I have here is with Doug Turnbull with Nathan behind their bull. Just a really cool chance for me and for my friends to hunt with a legend like Doug. And he was there. Yeah, he was in our group, hunkered behind that giant anthill bridging 2 tree trunks when Nathan shot this bull. So finally it was my turn, and we had only 1 day left to get one more bull for this tribe before their festival kicked off. And so the pressure was on. We took the hunting truck and went down along the river several miles looking for old bulls, and kind of had thought we were going to have to start getting into the thickets because they all seemed to have moved out of the floodplains and into the thickets. But then at the very end of our reach where we were going to go, we saw a lone bull just as we came around a corner, and there's this floodplain reaching up, a long finger of mud from where the river was, and this bull was on the other side. Well, he saw us the same time we saw him, and he kind of did this awkward old man gallop for a few leaps and then dropped to a trot and then stopped and just looked at us. It was clear that we were in his bedroom and he didn't want to leave. And so we carefully, sneakily, stealthily got out of the truck. He was watching us. There was nothing we could do, right? And conferred for a moment. And the PH said, he'll probably just move into the brush there and stop. Let's go up, head this long mud strand, which we couldn't walk through. It's too deep and muddy. And then come back. We'll get the wind right, and we'll track him into the brush. Because he was perfect. He was the oldest bull we'd found yet, worn down, chunks taken out of his boss. His face was half bald. His ears were in tatters. He just moved like an old man too, right? So that's what we started to do. We headed up, just walking kind of slow and bent over, trying not to appear to be a threat. And we thought we'd spook this bull and he'd probably just trot into the brush and stop. To our surprise, he didn't spook. Instead, he started paralleling this mud finger on the other side and looking at us rather evilly. He didn't want to leave his bedroom. We were in his house. So that kind of notched things up a little bit, right? Especially since we'd already had one, genuine charge this trip. Well, we got up to where we figured we could cross the mud, and we gave it a try and almost didn't get it done. I almost lost a shoe, went down mid-thigh deep at one point and whatnot in this mud, but we got across. And as we were floundering in it, the bull did run kind of like tail ringing. He ran into the brush on that side, looking at us out of the corner of his eye. We thought, okay, he's finally spooked. We kind of gathered ourselves together, wiped the bulk of the mud off. I checked my rifle, chambered an expanding bullet first, 500-grain trophy bonded bear claw, and then I had 5 more in the magazine. There were 5 trophy bonded sledgehammer bullets following it. We moved into the edge of the brush and stopped, maybe 15, 20 yards into the fringe of the brush there. And Jock checked with everybody, checked his own double rifle, checked with the cameraman and said, are you ready to go? Everything was good. We turned to start working into the wind, and Jock froze. And he put up the sticks. Knowing better than to ask, where is he? I just slid onto the sticks and pointed the rifle the direction that Jock was looking. And there, 40 yards away, was this bull staring at us. Yes, he'd gone into the brush, but then he came toward us, into the wind. At that point, he knew what we were and where we were, and he was staring at us 40 yards away, head up, looking at us like Robert Rourke wrote, as if we owed him money. Jock asked me, "Can you shoot him in the brain?" in a quiet whisper, because that's all we could see. We could see the bull from kind of his jawline up. Well, I'd been shooting 3-inch black dots at 50 yards with the iron sights with that rifle at 50 yards. And that's smaller than a buffalo's brain. Of course, you have adrenaline, you have fatigue, you have all those different factors. But I said, I think I can. I got on the bull. My sights were steady on the top of his nose, where there's that little bit of room between the top of his nose and the bottom of his boss. Took a deep breath, and I slowly pressed the trigger. When the rifle fired, the bull's head launched upward as if hit with a catapult and twisted sideways, but it came back down focused on us, and I knew that I'd missed the brain. The bull wheeled hard away from us, and I ran the lever fast. He wheeled but then turned back as if he was going to turn toward us, and both of us fired. Both of us shot over him. Both of us actually scratched, because Jock shot at that point too with his 470. There were 2 scratches across the top of his withers, and all I can imagine is that he must have compressed into his front legs just as our rifles went off and kind of dropped. Or we just shot too fast, made bad shots. He took another couple leaps forward, and I hit him squarely through the ribs. I saw the dust fly. When I'd missed him with the second shot, and I saw the dust pop over the top of him, a little troll in the back of my mind said, "This won't do. Steady down and place your shots." And I hit him squarely through the ribs with my next shot. Right after I hit him, Jock hit him again, squarely through the ribs with his DGX bonded bullet out of his 470 Nitro. And the bull at this point was bucking like a rodeo bull, hard. And he started to turn toward us and dropped his head. Just as I fired again, as the trigger broke and the rifle fired, I had a mental picture of my sights hanging directly on the point of his shoulder as he was quartering to us. And he almost went down as that leg buckled out from underneath him. And at that point, he rallied, he gathered himself, he turned. I sent another one through his ribs broadside, and he hightailed it straight away from us. And I was out. I was empty. Jock was reloading. I thumbed a couple cartridges into the magazine of my rifle and ran forward a few steps to where I had a clear shot of this bull, which was now running at about 60 yards. Jock hollered, "Try and break his neck," just as I raised the rifle and dropped the hammer. But I had neglected to run the lever. I had 2 shots in the tubular magazine, but I hadn't run the lever and put one in the chamber, so I got a click. Kind of a mistake on my part. The bull was gone. We kind of gathered together and talked it through. Exciting stuff, right, folks? The cameraman said, "You stopped his effort to come when you broke his shoulder." And Jock said, "Yeah, he was trying to come right there. You broke his shoulder and you turned him." So I have never, and I never will call that a proper charge, because he never got any momentum. But that bull did want to come for us. Well, we reloaded, got everything hunky-dory, and we started following him into the brush. We had gone maybe 50 or 60 yards. We followed where he was running when I tried to shoot, and my rifle just clicked. And suddenly Jock pointed to the side, and there he lay, off to our right about 20 yards, and he had gone up and fish-hooked back, just like they do in the stories, and stood braced against all those bullet holes in him, angry, waiting to ambush us as we followed his tracks. But he died before we got there. What an incredibly cool old bull, and what an incredible experience. So, long story short, we got the bull to the village that night in time for their feast. We took some tongue. We had buffalo tongue with wild mustard, and we ate his balls too. You bet we did. Okay, that was our Namibia safari of 2019. And I don't know if you can tell by the excitement I tell the story with, but to this day, just an incredibly rich, vivid experience. That was my first time in the field hunting Cape buffalo, and I got to be there for 4 different hunts, concluding with my own. I wasn't real proud of the miss on his brain, but by golly, we got it done properly before he got away, right? We put enough bullets through his vitals that we killed him without anybody getting injured. And often, that's just how it goes with Cape buffalo. Ironically, although I'd waited all my years that I'd lived to that point to hunt Cape buffalo, I got to hunt 2 in that year, in 2019. I went to Mozambique that September with a group hosted by Craig Boddington, and Hornady were my specific hosts, Hornady and Ruger and Trijicon Optics. So I was using a beautiful Ruger Hawkeye African M77 action rifle, chambered in .416 Ruger. And before the hunt, while planning, visiting with Mark Gurney of Ruger there, we started talking about trying to put together kind of a special rifle. And he said, we've considered putting the Hawkeye African into our custom shop line and just doing a little nicer polished blue on the action and the barrel and a little upgraded wood. Why don't we put one together like that and send it to you as kind of a trial run / prototype for this hunt? So that's what I got to hunt with. The rifle is absolutely spectacular. It's got some of the nicest wood I've ever seen in a rifle stock on it. When I got it, I actually was a little concerned about the strength of the wrist of the stock because it's a fairly light rifle in a fairly potent cartridge. And being such a beautifully figured stock, well, they just aren't as strong as a straight grain stock. So I took it to an old gunsmith friend of mine there who built wood rifle stocks from the ground up for decades and was a real specialist with it. His name was Roland Black, and he's an absolute guru at glass bedding an action into a good stock. Roland is retired and not working anymore, but the rifles that he worked on for me are cherished possessions. At any rate, he agreed with me on that grain, and so he ended up drilling a hole from the action mortise all the way back through the wrist of that rifle stock, and then glass bedding a rod in the wrist of that stock for strength. So now we have beauty and strength combined. It's a wonderful solution. He free floated the forend for me, and that rifle shoots just really, really well. Another thing about, since we're talking gear here for a little bit, the M77 Hawkeye action is one of my favorite actions, but, and I say this with humor and with love, when you get a brand new one, they can feel like they've got gravel in the action. They're just a bit rough. When they're assembled, they don't have the edges, the burrs and whatnot polished off real well. And so they can take some time to break in. The simplest way to do kind of a modest break in is to just put lots of oil, kind of a thick gun oil, on your bolt and run it a lot. Just work it a lot. You can dry fire these, no problem. Work the action a lot and it'll kind of burnish in a bit. With this one, I wanted more, and so I used a jeweler's compound, polishing compound, coated the bolt, coated even the cocking piece with this stuff, and kept reapplying as necessary, and I worked that action, honed that action for the full length of the movie Dances with Wolves. Then it took me about that long additional just to get all the gunk cleaned out, all this honing compound. But the result was the smoothest functioning Ruger rifle I've ever used. It is like grease on glass, and it feeds those big blunt-nosed Hornady factory loads super well now. 3 down plus 1 in the magazine, and I was ready to go. Nice, fairly light for what it is rifle that just carries and shoots beautifully. I was practicing with it down at the FTW Ranch in Texas on their dangerous game course, which includes targets of charging Cape buffalo. And I was able to fire this rifle follow-up shots in just over a second apiece, including functioning the action and recovering from recoil, right? That's pretty darn good. Part of that is due to the fact that it has a good muzzle brake on the front, which, there are various opinions on using muzzle brakes on dangerous game. You need to be able to hear the dangerous game, so you don't want to hunt with earplugs in. You just accept that your ears are going to get blasted a little bit, right? So the brake is a bad thing for that, for you, for the PH, for the trackers, everybody involved. I did use some special hearing protection by Tetra Hunt, which is a kind of a hearing aid / earplug combination that worked really well. They're expensive, but I highly recommend them for this sort of thing. At any rate, took the rifle, checked 0 in Mozambique. That was an experience all in itself, just getting there and getting in through customs, getting our visas, getting the rifle paperwork. It was fine as far as it all went smoothly. It was just a long, arduous process. The outfitter's Mark Haldane of Zambezi Delta Safaris and an extraordinary operator. Wonderful, wonderful host. Well, we tracked buffalo first and got some pretty close calls. And this was a full-on trophy buffalo hunt, right? This was not for management bulls. Then I had the opportunity to go out in the river delta with the machines they call the BVs. It's a old amphibious Russian tracked vehicle that runs for all the world on tracks like a little miniature tank, and then when you get it in water, it floats and progresses forward through the same action of the tracks, right? Just a gnarly cool experience. We found a herd of buffalo and crawled. Now, Craig Boddington had gone with me on this hunt, and it was awesome. He has shot more buffalo than any other man alive that I know, and is just a great guy to be around to hunt with. He's a fair bit older than me, but crawling through that sawgrass, we crawled like a long, long way for hours in this sawgrass that's just stubble high, really sharp. We're wearing gloves on our hands. He would have been smart enough to bring knee pads. I didn't. I had raw, bloody knees after this that were scabbed for 6 weeks. But anyway, we got close to this big herd, and in the herd there was a giant of a bull. When he laid his head, tipped it sideways to sleep, the bottom curve of his horn was so deep and so far out that his head almost didn't touch sideways. Greg later told me he estimated he was 47 inches wide. That, my friends, is a behemoth of a buffalo bull. I really wanted to shoot him, but according to my professional hunter, whose opinion is that's gospel, right? The bull was still on the young side and was just a trace soft along the edge of his boss. Craig told me, well, I think he's borderline. I don't think you'd be wrong to shoot him, but you always listen to your pH. And so I did. That's what I did, right? And thankfully, there was another really cool, really unique, very big old bull in the herd as well. He wasn't very wide. He was about 36 inches wide, but he had a world-class boss on him. Now, a good buffalo boss will be 14 inches from the front edge up over the top to the back edge. Most of them range anywhere from about 11 to 14 inches, with your average being 12 or 13 inches. This bull had a helmet like something out of the old Ice Age cartoons, right? Just a massive boss on him. Later turned out he would measure 16 and a half inches. And Kevin Steele, the publisher of Peterson's Hunting Magazine, told me, he said, I think that's every bit the trophy that a 50-inch buffalo is. I don't know buffalo well enough to know if he's right or not, but it was pretty cool to hear that. I think we hung in some papyrus reeds near this herd for an hour and a half or more before they started getting up. They'd all bedded, and they were all mixed in together. There was no clear shot. Well, eventually this bull got up, and they started moving, and I got on the sticks and was ready. I still had to wait 5 or 10 minutes before he cleared on the right side of the herd, and I fired. It felt like a good shot. I was actually surprised when the bull did what he did. He just hooked around, the whole herd took off, and he went lumbering after him. He was so big that he wasn't exactly like prancing gracefully across the river delta there, the sawgrass plains. He was lumbering, but I couldn't really see that he was wounded either. The PH said, again. I hit him again and again and again. And then I had to reload. I reloaded as quickly as I could as we hustled closer. And the bull had stopped, and he was kind of hunched now at this point, clearly hard hit. I shot again as he started trotting after the herd, and again and again. I hit this bull 8 times with a .416 Ruger before he finally collapsed and went down. What had happened, we later ascertained, was the bull was quartering ever so slightly away from me when I shot. And when I aimed at what they call the vital triangle right on his shoulder, 110 yards, my shot had been in the right-hand portion of that vital triangle, but since the bull was quartering, the bull was facing to the right, it kind of skimmed across the front lobe of his vital cavity. It may have touched his heart, I'm not sure, but it didn't kill him fast, I know that. And that allowed him to get that massive dump of adrenaline that makes these bulls almost invincible. Then as he hooked left and turned and ran, I was leading on the front of his shoulder, but I was hitting him mid-ribs, which on a buffalo is guts. I should have been holding off the front of his shoulder. Wasn't really thinking about the fact that I was shooting a cartridge that pushes a bullet about 2,200, maybe 2,300 feet per second, and not nearly 3,000 like I'm used to on a elk rifle or whatnot. So my lead was not adequate. When he slowed down and I fired, I think it was my 7th shot, that one center punched him, took off the top of his heart, and I did hit him one more time kind of as he's stumbling forward, but I probably didn't need to. At that point, he was done. My gosh. I mean, what kind of animal can take 8 solid impacts from a .416 Ruger and keep on going like they haven't even felt it? Unbelievably impressive, and just put the respect that I already knew for these animals just through the roof. Amazing experience out there in that river delta. The trackers took him apart right there, and we loaded him in the BV, and out we headed. That was something like a 19-hour day round trip. Long day, and just a glorious memory. Yeah, we had buffalo from that night, if I remember right. We had buffalo steaks from some of the bulls that had been shot previously. I think this was day 4 or 5 in my hunt in Mozambique. We went on to shoot big sable bulls there, 4 indigenous bulls. Mine was 39 inches. For an indigenous sable, 40 is kind of that holy grail mark. The bulls that you get in a lot of South Africa and Namibia and so forth will be bigger. The sable, not to get off on a tangent, but while I'm on the subject, they're bred for genetics, and often they're supplemented, right, with minerals and mineral licks, various things that help them grow bigger. So there, a 45-inch bull is kind of that holy grail number that you're trying to achieve. But these in Mozambique were 100% free range, big, beautiful sable. And most of us shot world-class warthogs as well. I've never seen an area that has as many giant warthogs as that place does. And waterbuck. I did not shoot a waterbuck. I need to go back and do that because they were massive and longhorn. Most places, a 30-inch waterbuck is an absolute giant. They shoot up to 34 inches with Zambezi Delta safaris there. So anyway, very cool. Spent a little time with that bull, admiring him, just soaking in the moment. Spent a little bit of time with the rifle taking pictures because it is a beautiful kind of extraordinary shooting tool. And then got a photograph with Colonel Boddington. Can't not do that when he comes along a Cape buffalo hunt with you. What a privilege to have him there. And then we headed on out. The next go-around I had for buffalo, I guess I've done 4 safaris where buffalo were involved, was in June of 2022 when I got to go with Adam Weatherby on his first, not just his first African safari, but his first Cape buffalo hunt. And kind of a cool deal. His father had done a hunt with Craig Boddington something like 30 or 40 years ago when they brought out the .416 Weatherby Magnum. And they went and tried it on buffalo, tested it, obviously proved it very capable. I got to go with Adam on his first Cape buffalo hunt. He took a .416 Weatherby Magnum to honor his grandfather. It was his father, Ed. Ed was the one that was heading up the company when they introduced the .416 Weatherby Mag. And Adam took the cartridge that was his first introduction, which is a 6.5 by 300 Weatherby, just a hot rocket of a 6.5 mm cartridge. And we went to Namibia. And there's a pretty cool story there. We also had my friend Austin Brown and Rob Gearing with us. So there were 4 of us on safari, and this turned out to be one of the best safaris I've ever been on. I've been blessed to do 10 at this point in my life, and this was one of the most memorable. Well, because Rob Gearing had always dreamed about shooting a Cape buffalo himself, we put him at the top. He was the oldest of us, probably the toughest too, and he borrowed a rifle that I took. I took a .416 Weatherby. Adam took one. They're kind of matching rifles, beautiful safari-grade rifles, and Rob Gearing borrowed mine, and we went and shot a management Cape buffalo for him. And we had some touch-and-go close calls, lots of hunting experience, compressed into a short time, which is important when you're shooting a lot of buffalo, because you don't want to just step out, shoot one, and it's done, right? Then your experience is over. When Rob's chance finally came, we'd been tracking and following 2 or 3 bulls in the heavy brush. And finally they stopped and had actually hooked and were working along the far side of a little dry pan about 60 or 70 yards away. And we bumped them. The one that we wanted ran about 50 yards straight ahead, which was just crossing in front of us. And Rob got quickly onto the shooting sticks, got on him, and waited. And sure enough, he stopped and looked at us. And Rob triggered that big rifle. If he'd been shooting at anything but African game, and probably even most African plains game, the shot would have been perfect. He put it right through the crease behind the shoulder on that Cape buffalo. And he told us as soon as the shot broke, the bull bucked and then vanished, going straight away from us into the thorn brush. He said, I forgot to hold right on his shoulder. I shot him in the crease. And Jock said, yep, it was too far back. That bull's not dead. We must go after him. And as Jock explained to us later, he has a method of following dangerous or wounded dangerous game, specifically wounded Cape buffalo. He didn't have time to explain it to us right then, but he just said, guys, get right to each side of me, and we're going right now. And we headed in there at not a brisk walk, but it certainly wasn't a step and glass the brush and step and glass the brush like you might do if you thought he was already waiting for you to come. We followed him about 40 yards into the thicket. Wasn't too thick right there. And then the tracks hooked left, and the tracker and Jock were working that way. I was at the very back. Rob was right with the PH, with Jock. And something told me to turn and look over my shoulder. And as I did, I saw this Cape buffalo 20 yards behind us, but facing away from us. And we had just about walked past him and then hooked to the left on the tracks of the other bulls that he'd been with. I made a tiny little squeak of some sort, and Jock turned. I motioned. He saw the bull, and under his breath, he said, both of you shoot him right now. And Robert and I were kind of shoulder to shoulder at this point. We both raised our rifles. I waited for the first shockwave to come off his rifle and triggered mine as soon as I felt it. And we both shot him up through the hips, breaking him down, and dropped him in his tracks right there. And that finished him pretty quickly. Thankfully, that bull had just run into the brush and was standing there going, what just happened? I don't feel so good. As Jock told us later, he said, a bull will go in there and it sometimes takes them 5 or 10 minutes to get mad. Then they get dangerous. He said, if you can get into the edge of that brush and find him quickly and finish him, there's a lot less risk of getting charged by that wounded bull. And that's exactly what we'd done, what we'd been fortunate enough to do. Jock also told us, he said, if we'd looked for 10 minutes and hadn't found him, we'd have backed out, and there's a whole lecture I give, a preparatory spiel on how we're going to do this so we all come out alive. And he said, I didn't get the chance to do that because we got, this finished properly and in good time. But he said, that's why I just hustled in there really quickly with you guys, just so you know. Interesting stuff that you learn after doing a few of these hunts. I don't think I've ever seen Rob Gearing get emotional. He's a pretty stalwart man, and he's climbed giant peaks around the world. He has been there and done that. He's a very strong character. But when he knelt by that buffalo and put his hand on that buffalo's horn, he could hardly speak. He was so grateful for this experience and that it had all come out without somebody getting hurt. I'm sure he'd been feeling the pressure that he'd screwed up and somebody could possibly get hurt out of it. Anyway, that was pretty special time. Friends, I don't know if I've been on a Cape Buffalo hunt that wasn't just jam-packed with incredible emotions and just as vivid an experience as you can experience anywhere around the world. So we spent a little bit of time talking, reliving it, doing some photographs, and then took that bull back to camp. I've asked Rob if he'd like to shoot another one. He said, I'd love to. I'd love to try and shoot another one and do it right this time. You know, you always want to do better with your next one. But I told him, hey, I had to shoot my first 6 times and my second one 8 times. So it happens sometimes. These are very tough animals. At any rate, it was a really good hunt. And I hope someday to be tracking buffalo again with my good friend Rob Gearing. Nobody I'd rather do it with. So then it was Adam Weatherby's turn, and a similar sort of thing happened. We kept getting close, but not quite closing the deal over and over, which in the end is exactly what you want, because you generate so many vivid, rich memories from hunting like that, from an experience like that. At one point, right on the river, we'd stalked a group of 4 bulls, and they were old, cranky Dugga boys. By the way, a Dugga bull is one that's past his prime, doesn't like to be with herds anymore, can tolerate the company of 1 or 2 other old bulls like him, but they're old, they're cranky, they don't feel good, they don't breed anymore. They roll a lot in the mud to keep insects off of them. And a Dugga boy, that, if I'm not mistaken, that means they're caked with mud. That word means like a mud-caked bull. And when you look at the pictures of Adam's bull, you can see the mud caked on his face and on his horn bosses. Well, we'd found this group of old bulls and stalked them 2 or 3 times over a couple of days. And at one point, we got on the wrong group and we got mixed up with a herd of, I think there were 3, maybe 4 prime breeding age bulls, which we weren't hunting, right? They weren't on the menu. And we got between them accidentally and where they wanted to go to bed. The river where they'd been watering was out maybe 50 yards in front of us, and then a strip of just verdant green grass they were grazing in. And when we stalked them and stopped in the edge of that brush, we unknowingly stopped on the trail they wanted to come through. And so when they decided to head out of that floodplain and go to their beds that morning, we came face to face with them. And at one point, Jock said, fade back into the brush. Go now, to Adam and I. And so we started fading back. Well, I heard a bull go, kind of like when they throw their head and blow snot and look at you like, I'm very unhappy you're here, right? Cattlemen will know what I'm talking about. And I looked over my shoulder, and maybe 8 or 10 yards behind us, maybe 12, there's a bull, and he's all postured up, and he was staring holes in Adam and I's backs. And under my breath, I said, get ready. And we both turned and faced this bull. Well, Jock was off to my left, and his whisper was like a whip crack. He said, get back now. And so we turned. He was ready with his 470, right? We turned and faded into the brush, and that bull watched us go and then took his trail and went into bed with the others following him. And we got the proper lecture from the PH later. He said, you always do as I tell you. He said, when you turned and faced that bull and locked eyes with him, you could have provoked a charge. They will come at you if you do that. That to him was saying, now this is my territory. You can't come into your bedding area, right? So, again, you do this, you learn, but just so intense. Later that day, we tracked the old group of Dugga boys that we had been after. And there was a specific one in there that we wanted. He was worn down and old and belligerent. We'd had a couple of close calls where he stood, no shot at his vitals because they were screened with brush, glaring at us, and you could see he was trying to decide whether to leave or come tell us, to get out of his territory. Well, we got onto these bulls in another little dry pan, and we stalked up behind what I want to call a cabbage palm. It's a little short, bristly palm tree with fronds hanging over the right side, and we were all on our knees or sitting looking underneath the right side of this thing. Jock scooted out, unscrewed the lower legs on his shooting sticks, and set up a sitting height sticks, and Adam snuck in behind him, got his rifle on the sticks as this bull's standing more or less half asleep 80 yards away, and Adam put an absolutely perfect heart shot on this bull, just took off the top of his heart. Well, as Cape buffalo tend to do, just like anything that's heart shot can do, he went into a death run, just fast. And as he did so, he turned and came down the wide open alley in front of him. Well, that alley crunched down to about 20 yards wide, and we were sitting in the left side of it underneath this palm tree, right? Adam shot him again through the ribs. Then Jock, this will tell you something about dangerous game rifles and ammunition. Jock's trigger clicked with his first barrel. He didn't even turn a hair. He just shifted to his back barrel, and Adam hit him again. That was his third shot, and then Jock shot and hit the bull as he's barreling toward us like a locomotive, probably 40 yards at this point. Hit him right at the neck shoulder junction, broke his spine, and that bull went chin down in the dirt, butt straight in the air, tons of momentum, and literally plowed through the dirt. Giant plume of dust coming up around him, and then his butt came up and over and fell. It was one of the most spectacular kill shot drop sequences I've ever seen. Adam jumped up, slammed a couple of solids into his rifle. Jock said, shoot him right over the top of his boss. By this time he was on his brisket, facing us, and you could see his hump and the spine coming down there. So Adam did. Offhand, 40, 50 yards, whatever it was, he just put it on the X, broke the spine right at the top of the skull where it merges into the neck. And that was that. Again, incredibly rich, vivid experience and hunt. If you look closely, those of you looking at the pictures here, you can see Adam has a pair of little half-moon cuts in his eyebrow. Two of those sitting shots, that scope bit him and left what looks like a little fang-shaped pair of cuts in his eyebrow. And so he had blood streaming down his face when he jumped up, slammed those solids in, and then finished his bull off, anchored him with that insurance shot. Just a really, really cool situation. Now, Jock, the PH, was initially skeptical about our load because we were shooting, get this, .416 caliber, right? .416 Weatherby Magnum rifles, but instead of a heavy bullet, we were shooting monometals, Barnes bullets, 350 grain tip triple shocks. And our muzzle velocity was close to 2,800 feet per second, just screaming, very fast, faster than you generally use for Cape buffalo, right? And so with the lighter weight bullet and extreme velocity, Jock wondered if these bullets were going to penetrate. They actually penetrated beautifully. The petals would sometimes shear off, but in most cases, we got pass-throughs on these bulls, which was okay because we're hunting wide open country with Dugga boy groups. We weren't shooting into big herds. In a place like Mozambique, where you're likely going to shoot a bull that's in a herd, you want a bullet that won't pass through because you don't want to shoot two with one shot, right? We told the stories of those hunts around the fire again and published that podcast, I think, late June of 2022. If you want to listen to that, that was the second one around the campfire as we're recapping all of our experiences there, including a giant kudu that Austin Brown shot in a thicket there. Man, that's one of our most popular episodes of all time. And I've gotten a large amount of feedback of people saying, this is what inspired me to go to Africa, and thank you. So go check that out. You can hear those stories firsthand and vivid. The last time I hunted Cape buffalo, not the last time I ever will, certainly, but the last time in my current experience was last November when I took my two oldest, Audrey, who was 15 at the time, and William, who was 13 at the time. You all know him as our backcountry apprentice here on the podcast. Took them to Namibia for a plains game hunt and Cape buffalo for myself and for Austin Brown. Austin came along, so there were the four of us. We hunted kudu and plains game animals first and had a really good hunt with, again, Kovas Adventure Safaris on the edge of the Kalahari, southeast of Windhoek, which is the primary town in Namibia where you fly into. Had a wonderful experience there, and then we made the 12-hour drive back up north to the Caprivi Strip, historically called Caprivi Strip, and hunted along the river there for a pair of Cape buffalo. Now, Austin and I had not got to shoot one the previous time when we went with Adam and with Rob Gearing. We knew ahead of time that we had 2 permits that safari, and we might get 2 more, but it didn't transpire. So being that Rob was senior and Adam had never had a chance to hunt one, and Austin was young enough that he'd have more opportunities, Austin and I both deferred to them, and so Rob and Adam shot the 2 permits that we had. This time we had 2 permits again, and Austin was up first. I really wanted to see him get a Cape buffalo. He's become one of my good friends and all-time favorite hunting partners, and he brought a Winchester Model 70 stainless synthetic chambered in 416 Remington Magnum that he had bought off of an old friend who made him promise to take it to Africa someday. It's the only way he'd sell it to him. So Austin had a promise to fulfill, and he was pretty invested in doing this on this hunt. So when we got up to the Okavango River, it was mid-November, and it was hot. It was hitting 104, 105, 106 degrees in midday, and we started tracking buffalo in the early morning. We tracked till about 1:30 the first day, and I was getting dehydrated, and I had a little bit too much sun. We'd bumped different bulls. I think we'd messed up about 4 or 5 different close calls, and we're just having the time of our life. But we bumped this group hard enough that I knew it'd be miles before we came up with them again. And I had to be honest, and I just said, guys, I need to shade up. I need to get my core cooled down. I need to get hydrated. Can we take a little break? And Jock thought about it for a minute and said, you know what? Let's go back to camp. We're going to have a good lunch, and we're going to cool down, rest up. We'll come back out in the evening. We had another couple close calls, but didn't make it happen. And then kind of almost repeated the next day, but before we hit that super intense midday, like early afternoon heat, Austin got his chance. We got on a bull, and he shot him at about 40 yards in an absolute thicket. I mean, this was just dog hair thick, about 12 foot high. And we worked this herd for a while before we finally got a shot. 1/4-2, and he hit him right on the big shoulder knuckle, broke that down. The bull whipped around, almost fell, then whipped around to leave, and Austin hit him up through the hip and broke that hip, just shattered the pelvis. So now the bull couldn't go anymore. He went down, he wallowed in a half circle, exposed his chest, and Austin put one more bullet into his chest, through his heart and his lungs, and that was that. Now, I want to tell you something a little bit about bullets here. Oh, this just blew my mind when I saw this. So Austin was shooting Barnes bullets, hand-loaded 400 grain triple shocks, expanding bullets for his initial shot, followed by 400 grain banded solids for his follow-up shots. That first shot hit the Cape buffalo squarely on the knuckle. Now, that knuckle is the size of a small cantaloupe, right? And it protects the heart when a bull's standing at an angle like that. Of course, it hit the bull real hard. He flipped around, as I've narrated, and Austin broke his hip and then finished him when he rolled around and exposed his chest. When we were standing in the skinning shed there, looking for wound paths, watching as the skinners did their job, and talking about the various bullet performance, we were both a little perplexed that that first shot hadn't kind of killed the bull a little bit faster. Not that it took long. Austin put those 3 shots into him pretty quickly. I asked one of the skinners, one of us asked him, hey, can you try and recover that bullet? Because all of them were still in him. And he said, the one that hit here on his shoulder. And we said, yeah. And he went to cutting inside and underneath that skinned out gigantic shoulder, but on the side that the bullet came from. And I said, no, I think it's going to be around here. And I went back and I kind of tapped on the back of the buffalo's rib cage on the outside. And he kind of just shook his head and kept working. And I said, it's a monumental bullet. It wouldn't have lost so much weight that it would have stopped in that shoulder. And he just kind of shook his head, mumbled something, and Jock at that point said, just watch him. He knows where he's going. And this skinner he peeled away that giant shoulder, folded it back. It was still attached along the back edge to this carcass. And there indeed is this massive wound channel full of bone shards where it had come through that big shoulder knuckle and then hit the front side of this bull's brisket where all those ribs are attached to that heavy bone right there. And by the way, folks, if you're not familiar with buffalo anatomy, their ribs, Cape buffalo ribs actually overlap. There's no such thing as shooting through the gap on a Cape buffalo's rib cage, as I understand it. Anyway, there's this ragged bullet hole going in to the meat on this bull's brisket. And the skinner starts probing in there with his fingers. And I was like, just waiting for his fingers to cave through. And then I was going to say again, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be over here on the backside of his rib cage. And he came out with the bullet. I was flabbergasted. As my British in-laws might say, I was gobsmacked. And he handed me the bullet. It was pretty darn distorted. But even a monumental expanding bullet can be forgiven for being mangled after going through a cantaloupe-sized hunk of pure Cape buffalo bone. What amazed me the most was, still, it had penetrated probably 18 or 20 inches, right? And much of that was pure bone. But that bull's anatomy had stopped that bullet before it got into his vital cavity. Holy smokes. If it'll do that with a Barnes monumental bullet, it'll do it with any bullet in the world aside from a non-expanding design. If that bullet had been one of the banded solids, like Austin was using for his backup shots, sure enough, it would have punched all the way through and got into the vitals and put, a 1/2 inch or .416 caliber size hole back through both lungs, probably taking out the top of the heart just by the way it was placed, right? The angle. But, oh my gosh, I hardly could believe this. We found where the other bullet went. It just went through his brisket, kind of down in a different location and angled up into the bull's vitals. It's the one that killed him. The one that went in through his hindquarter, penetrated basically the full length of the animal. If I remember right, I can't remember if they found that bullet or not, but they traced its path all the way up forward into the vitals as well. But, wow, just tells you something about how tough and how big a Cape buffalo's anatomy can be. And just consider this for a minute, folks. That Cape buffalo, yeah, he's bigger. His chassis is built heavier than, say, a moose or even an American buffalo. Some call them bison, same thing. But not that much, not by that much. And so when you go to shoot a moose or a similarly classed big animal, even non-dangerous game, and this is why I like to have a really good bullet that's designed to be tough, hold together, and penetrate deeply. They're probably not going to stop a great big bullet like a Cape buffalo will, but they're still getting up there into a similar type class of anatomy, right? Food for thought. As you look at these photos, friends, those of you looking at the slideshow on Patreon, you can see the brush we were in. You can see the mud on this old bull's horns. You can see the rifle. that Austin used. It's a pretty cool practical rifle, right? Stainless and synthetic, just a no-frills, hard-working rifle. And you can probably see the look on Austin's face. He's either grinning ear to ear or he's just soaking in the moment with this buffalo and fulfilling his promise to his old friend with his old friend's rifle that he had always dreamed about and never been able to take to Africa. That leads us to the last, second to last bull in this story, which was my Cape Buffalo bull. We were running short on time. We only had 3 days to kill these 2 bulls for the tribe up there along the river. And so the third morning we started tracking, and we had a couple close calls, but we were struggling to find an old age class bull with poor genetics. We saw some big bulls, we saw some younger bulls with poor genetics, but we just didn't see anything that really qualified. We finally got into a big thicket about noon, giant thicket, hundreds of acres of brush and small trees, shrubs, and tracked a group of 3 or 4 bulls. And we'd seen one that was embarrassingly poor genetics. I mean, he had little short stubby horns that curled up and didn't look good, but that was what we were after, right? That was the sort of bull we wanted to kill. And he was old, great big, heavy old body. And we played cat and mouse with them in this really thick brush for an hour and a half, nearly 2 hours. And I could tell Jock was getting not antsy, but he knew we needed to get it done because we were supposed to have this buffalo cut up ready for the tribe to pick up before dark that night. And he finally said to me, look, these bulls are all old enough age class. We're going to take the first honest opportunity to kill one cleanly that we get. Not long after that, to our left, there was a bull looking at us over a little leafy bush. And I think he was between 70 and 80 yards away. I want to say he was 72 or 73 yards. I got on the sticks, and I was using my Dumoulin Mauser, a square bridge Mauser, in 9.3 by 62. This is a beautifully handy little rifle, 20-inch barrel, and shoots a 286 grain Barnes triple shock bullet really well, like sub-inch groups often. And it's over 100 years old. I really wanted to shoot a buffalo with this. This was the smallest cartridge I'd ever hunted with, or even been around anybody hunting buffalo with. But I knew that if I put my bullet in the right place and shot fast, and I had my good buddy Jock there with his double rifle to back me up, we'd be fine. So this bull was facing us, and we couldn't quite see through this little leafy brush in front of him, just a single bush. And he was staring at us. He didn't know quite how badly he needed to spook, so he wasn't spooking, but he wasn't real relaxed either. Jock said, can you take him? And I said, I can't see his vitals through the brush. And he said, okay, don't shoot. But I knew, and he knew, we needed to get a bull down. After a minute or so of this stalemate, I grabbed one leg of the shooting sticks and just lifted it a little bit because I was down quite low. And as I did so, an opening appeared exactly over the heart of this buffalo that was facing us exactly straight on. I could see the spot. I had a 3-inch hole to shoot through, and I was rock steady and calm. And I said, okay, now I can kill him. And he said, are you 100% sure? And I said, yes. And he said, then shoot. And I heaved a deep breath, pressed the trigger, and that little Dumoulin rifle cracked, and that buffalo lurched backward, wheeled sideways, and went into a thundering run. I'd run the bolt fast, and I got back on him, but Jock said, don't shoot. And I wasn't about to because all 3 of them were just neck and neck astride, shifting positions. I couldn't tell which one was him, and I could only see him for about 15 yards flickering anyway from the position where he'd been standing, flickering through that brush, and then they were gone. And you just hear the rumbling footfalls. And we listened. And not 30 seconds after I'd shot, the classic death bellow echoed through that thicket, and Jock just lit up. You could see a burden came off his shoulders. I'm sure he was happy we had the bull down, and he was also happy we'd killed him with one shot with, let's call it a adequate but not robust level of cartridge for Cape buffalo. And man, I was relieved too, but I was also like validated. I knew my shot had gone where I'd aimed it with that rifle. I trust it, and I knew it was going to be adequate. That's the first bull. I've only shot 3, but the first bull I've ever killed with one shot. It was also with the smallest cartridge. Pretty fun. As you look at these photographs here, you can see it's just a beautiful little rifle. Classic Mauser, but a square bridge design that's been fit by Joe Smithson, who he and his son Brett are fantastic gunsmiths. They're some of the only guys in the United States that are properly good enough to do things like restoring Holland and Rigby rifles from the past to full glory. These guys build extraordinary rifles, and they do extraordinary restoration work. And they had restored the metal on this one for me and fit Joe Smithson's quick detach scope mounts. And this is one of those rifles that, well, I won't be buried with it, but if I could, I would. I just love it. The funny end to this story is, as those of you that know buffalo who are looking at these photographs will have noticed, this is not just an old bull, he's a big bull. And maybe the biggest bull I ever am privileged to hunt and shoot. He's not a tremendous monster, but he's a really, really nice bull. And we didn't get to keep any of them. It all went to the tribe, which I knew ahead of time. I was still honored to hunt him, to take him cleanly, to provide that meat for the locals, to eat a little bit of him myself, including, you got it, his balls. And I've got the photographs. I've got the memories. My kids got to come with us and see him as we took him out of there. And, yeah. Again, I don't know how often I can say it without being redundant, but hunting Cape buffalo provides absolutely stunning, vivid memories that'll last a lifetime without fading. So here's the funny thing. The next day we planned our 12-hour drive back to the safari headquarters on the edge of the Kalahari. But our flights didn't leave until late the following day. And around the fire that night, Jock said, "Hey guys, I think we're going to break this up. We're going to do half our drive tomorrow and half the following day, and then we'll just take you straight to the airport." We're like, "Oh, okay." He said, "There's a nice little place we'll stay that we love to stay at between here and there." He said, "Meanwhile," and he gets this twinkle in his eyes, he said, "the tribe has asked if we'd like to shoot one more buffalo. Does anybody want to go out again in the morning?" And, well, my budget was blown. So I just said, "Man, I'd love to, but I can't afford to." And I looked over at Austin, and he had his giant grin, and he said, "I'm in." And so the next morning, probably mid-morning, he had a chance to take a second buffalo. And because I'd kind of been leaving my kids while I went and tracked buffalo with Austin, this time I stayed with them and we hung out. We were on the hunting truck, so we got to listen. We saw buffalo. We glassed up various things. We took pictures and just shared stories and notes and had a great time. And we heard shots. We heard one shot. And then 2 or 3 minutes later, we heard another shot, and then another, getting kind of quick. And we're like, "Oh, that doesn't sound good." But a few minutes later, the tracker came out and got in the truck, and we drove on in and went up to them. And it was kind of funny. They'd got close. Austin had put a shot into this bull, the easiest of the buffalo hunts we had. Just everything came together. Of course, Austin's getting experienced at this point, so he's starting to be able to read their body language and know when to time everything, when to move, when to slide onto the sticks, when to be prepared for a shot opening to, a window to open briefly. And so he was better prepared for this hunt. And he shot a bull squarely on the sweet spot. And the bull jumped and lurched and ran a little bit. And then they both just waited. Now, this is something that we don't recommend. Even Austin, Jock, nobody recommends this. But I'd just kill the bull with one shot, and either Jock or Austin looked at the other. They're about 40, 50 yards away and said, "Hey, should we see if, well, let's just let him die," right? He wasn't trying to escape. They could see the blood running. It was all in the perfect spot. We still don't know what happened because that bull just didn't die. He was shot, I think, through both lungs just above the heart. And maybe it just was taking him 5 minutes, but you don't let something stand there for 5 minutes. So a minute or so in, Austin hit him again. The bull turned to run, and he went to work and bang, bang, hit him 2 more times, and it was done. But just goes to show you that when you can, pour it on, right? If I'd had a second shot opportunity with my 9.3, I absolutely would have hit my buffalo again. I just didn't. He was in with the other bulls, and then they were all in the thicket and out of sight so fast I couldn't get a follow-up shot. So this was kind of a bonus blessing for Austin. Classically, buffalo hunters, Cape buffalo hunters would take 2 buffalo on a safari. They'd shoot a good one, and then they'd look for a great one, right? So then they had a buffalo, and they had the chance to shoot another. And usually these guys would shoot 2. Historically, Robert Rourke and Hemingway, all those guys would shoot 2 bulls. But it's become expensive these days. And so generally, a hunter will only shoot 1 Cape buffalo on a hunt. Austin had the blessed opportunity to take 2 with his old friend's rifle in a 3-day period, tracking them the right way, the hard way, through that scorching African habitat. By the way, forgot to mention, we checked the temperature. When I shot my bull, it was 106 degrees. Wow. I think that's the hottest temperature I've ever hunted in. It was, chuckle and say it, but it was a dry heat. Thank goodness. It wasn't bad. In fact, it was a fantastic experience. If you're looking at the pictures, you'll see both of Austin's bulls were just good, solid, hard-bossed, full-age class Cape buffalo. They needed meat more than genetics weeded out at this point, so we were just taking age class more than anything. But his second bull is particularly nice, with a really heavy corrugated surface on his boss and heavy hooked horns that he's starting to polish back a bit, ragged ears, scars on his face and his shoulders. Pretty darn cool experience. And folks, that was it. That's all of the buffalo that I have been in on the hunting. Let me just throw this out there. Right now, we're all getting ready for our fall deer and elk hunts here in the States, right? Antelope hunts are underway. Most of the archery hunts are underway, or even already over. Muzzleloader hunts are coming, or are underway already. So why throw something different in like this? I just got thinking and dreaming about Cape buffalo and looking at pictures, and I thought I should share some pictures with our loyal supporters on Patreon, and then, well, it snowballed, and here we are, talking about Cape buffalo hunting in Africa. And maybe that's a good thing, because while we're in the heat of our planning, while we're in the fervor and our blood is up and we're ready to hunt, we're planning to hunt, that's the best time to be inspired to do more. I don't know if, listeners, folks, I don't know if Cape buffalo's ever been on your radar. And for many of us, it probably can't be, because it's not an inexpensive hunt. It's not crazy expensive like hunting Dall sheep or whatnot is these days. It's not as expensive as a moose hunt anymore, a guided moose hunt. You can get a good Cape buffalo hunt for half the cost of a really premium Alaska moose hunt. So, there's a balance there, but if you haven't considered it, you should. And if finances are a barrier, still don't give up, because there are areas and times when you can occasionally do something like one of these management hunts that costs maybe 30% of what a true trophy hunt costs. So don't give up. And if you're a rifle nutcase and you've always thought, man, I'd love to have that 375 H&H big bore, but I can't justify it. I don't think I'll ever use it. Well, stop thinking that way. Buy a 375 H&H. Start planning and go to Africa. Hunt Black Death. It'll leave you a changed hunter, and for the better. It'll leave you with memories that won't fade like most do. There's some sort of an intensity to hunting dangerous game up close, which you have to do, right? It's too difficult to place a perfect shot at extended distances. You got to get close to honest to goodness dangerous game. There's something special about it. Folks, if you have questions, please ping me on, Patreon is best, but you can ping me on Instagram or whatnot. You can email Joseph at Backcountry Podcast as well. I don't check that very often, but when I do, I'll try and respond to all the questions there. And go back and listen to our past episodes on hunting Africa. And I hope I inspire you to go on safari. Start with Plains game. Keep on dreaming about a Cape buffalo hunt. I'm Joseph von Benedict, and maybe I'll see you around a camel thorn fire in Africa's backcountry.